Hello, lovely humans. It's so lovely to see you here today. So, thank you so much for taking the time. If you haven't already, do pop in the chat feature where you're watching from today so everyone can see that. I've already seen one person tuning in from Montenegro, which is unreal, but far more closer to home. We've got Lex in Kent, we've got Hannah in Cambridge, James in Birmingham, Nicola in Sheffield. The list goes on. If you haven't already, do pop in your chat feature into your chat feature and make sure that toggle, as ever, is switched from host to panelists to everyone so everyone can see your messages today, and we can keep that chat going on throughout the duration of today's session, just like Julian has, just like Gemma has, just like Sophie has, Nessa, Jane, Ruth. You're all absolute legends, so thank you for spending the time today. I hope we can help, and I hope we can educate, and I hope we can have a lot of fun while doing so. Today we have two absolute legends and new friends joining us. First, we have Nicole Ponce, who's the influencer marketing team lead at Semrush, and then we have Sarah Adam, who's the head of partnerships and influencer marketing over at Wix. I asked both to speak today because both are undoubtedly amazing human beings, but they also share generously when it comes to the topic of influencer marketing, something that can sometimes feel a bit of a mystery. And so I can feel like I can count myself as part of the group today and say that like I'm really looking forward to learning from both Nicole and Sarah today. I'm coming in today as a layman, so I am going to ask all the stupid questions, and so hopefully we can learn an awful lot today. Hello to Kirsty in Glasgow and Pernille in Copenhagen. I love that, and Eric in Bucharest. We're proper international audience today. That's really, really cool. This week's featured sponsor is Exclaimer. Now, I love Exclaimer because they speak to the little things, and they make the little things the big things. And in this case, this is all about managing your email signatures for two reasons. The first is brand consistency, and then the second is all about giving you the opportunity to use your email signature as an option to promote your business, your service, etc., etc. They've just added a new feature into Exclaimer, which enables you to embed your social media channels into your signature, which we all know how hard we work on our social media. And so another opportunity to showcase those things, that's what Exclaimer can help you do. So if you're interested in 20% off Exclaimer, take a look at the QR code on your screen right now. Also, a big, big thank you to Frontify, Cambridge Martin College, ScoreApp, Planable, Storyblock and Redgate. We'll speak about those more in the weeks that are coming up. With all that said, let's get going with the topic of today, which is all about influencer marketing with two lovely human beings. So Sarah, I'm going to come to you first. So I'll say thank you to you, and I'll say thank you to Nicole as well for
Good to
being
be
here.
here.
So Sarah, like as I say, I'm coming into today as a bit of an influencer marketing novice. So when I'm coming in to you as a pro, how do you define influencer marketing in 2024? Because I have a suspicion it might have changed in versus some of our perceptions.
So it's a good question. And I think possibly any brand that you ask that question that does influencer marketing could well give you a different answer, which is, I think, part of the beauty of the industry of influencer marketing, that it's so dynamic, and there's so much going on and so many opportunities. And I feel that it does change from niche to niche. However, when I'm asked, what do you do at Wix? What is this thing called influencer marketing to people that really don't know? So I say, I think the most basic way to describe it, at least again, this is true to what we're doing, is that we are partnering with, we are paying influencers, and we can have another discussion of what is an influencer. Influencers in our niche, so influencers that are followed by, that create compelling content that's targeting the same audience that we're after. And we partner with them so that they create content that's authentic. So content, that they create from A to Z. We're not telling them what to do. We do give them a brief. We give them some sort of guidelines. but the whole idea is that they are both the creators and the distributors of their own content that happens to be about us.
Nice.
But it's delivered in a way that we could never describe, whatever it is, whatever message it is, whatever feature we want to raise awareness to, whatever it is, they do it in a different way, I would say in a better way even than we could do about ourselves. And I'll just add, there's like something that makes it easier to understand even more, is that if you imagine that you're in a car with the influencer's driving, and the brand is in the back seat. So the brand is the one who's telling the influencer where to go, meaning telling them what the destination is, which is, in other words, the brief,
Mhm.
but is not interfering, right? The influencer decides how to get there, which roads to take, etc. And that to me is true influencer marketing.
Nice. I love that. And thank you for two reasons. Because the first is I'm not surprised that word authenticity has come up really early in the
Okay.
session. But then the second is that the idea already there is a control given to the influencer that perhaps some folks would not necessarily associate with it straight off the bat. They might sort of think about that sort of second or third level
Yeah, you're
when they're
right.
thinking about it. But the fact that you're mentioning that straight up at the front, that feels quite significant to me. So I appreciate you
Sure.
highlighting that straight away. Um, Nicole, I suspect there probably aren't huge deviations in your definition of influencer marketing from what Sarah has just spoken about. So maybe we could go to misconceptions around influencer marketing because that also feels like quite a fruitful land to kind of play. So, what misconceptions do you deal with when you sort of speaking about your job and what you do?
Yeah, so well, actually, thank you for having me. I loved Sarah's definition, was the straight to detail. I think now there's also a different word of the creator economy,
Mm.
along with what is influencer marketing and what is a creator economy, what is an affiliate, what is a brand ambassador. Like there's so many words thrown around, and what is actually which one is in what lane. So as the creator economy grows, I think the misconception is when you're working with an influencer, the influencer marketing is you're activating their channel. And when you're working with a creator, it's because you want that creator to create content either for your channel or within their channel if they do have a channel that really aligns with the content and the platform or whatever you're trying to advertise, because maybe there are some creators that create content perfectly well, but their channel is not what you want to activate, but they'll create content even a little bit more organic than somebody else internally in the team. So I think that's a really great misconception of the definition of what does that look like,
Mhm.
um, which I think would be the most pinpoint. And of course, we can talk about affiliate marketing, brand ambassadors, et cetera. That also goes hand in hand, but that's a really big misconception in terms of how to activate the channel itself as with influencer marketing.
Nice. I mean, that in itself is fascinating because I wouldn't necessarily have drawn a comparison between the two. I mean, do you have a preference on the folks that you prefer to work with based on the definitions that you've just given of the different types of folks you can work with, or experience at least, at the very least, on the folks that you tend to prefer to work with?
Ideally, for a campaign, and Sarah, I'm not sure what you think on your end, but of course, when we're building out a campaign, it's because we want to activate the most amount of amplification of channel, because we want the most views, the most interactions, the most engagement of the people in the audiences that we don't have that connection to. So
Mhm.
I definitely would love to work with influencers itself, but it really depends. Sometimes I actually do like just working with creators, even if they're not within the niche, so we can educate. So it really depends on the campaign, depends on the
Nice.
messaging, like what is our goal, what is our focus, what are the KPIs, la 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 la. I can go into a spiral. So yeah, it really does depend. But of course, if we're just talking about influencer marketing in general, I definitely just like working with influencers that do have a channel that I can activate it within, because that's where I see the most of the goals in terms of conversions.
Nice. I love that. I mean, that's experience shared. And so for folks who haven't necessarily activated the channel before, that in itself is really, really helpful. So thank you. Sarah, do you have anything to build on there or any misconceptions of your own? Because I suspect there are many that kind of exist
Um,
within the space.
yeah, I think a misconception that I come across, and I think it's something I know this isn't true for all brands, but for us specifically, I know that sometimes maybe brands that are new to the space don't think that they need to pay influencers necessarily for for
Right.
content.
Yeah.
So I've come across that even the need within the company to educate other marketeers that come to me without a budget and say, "Hey, we'd love to include influencers in this campaign." I'm like,
Mhm.
"Okay, what's your budget?" "No, we don't have." So yeah, that's a problem. Like you need to if you want content in return, or at least if you want to know, if you want to be certain you're going to get content and that content is going to be aligned with your messaging and with your brief, then you need to understand that it comes at a cost.
Mhm.
It's not, influencers don't work for free, and they shouldn't.
No, it's the
I
age old thing about working for exposure, right? So, sorry,
mhm.
Nicole, I'll cut you off there. So go ahead.
No, that I 100% agree, and I think it's up to us to really lead the way in this act. And if we want to keep like the world very professional, I think they are creators. They take time and effort, and if you don't create content yourself, you don't really realize how much time it takes to create a script, to make sure it's identified, make sure that it really aligns with the brand, but it also aligns to the community, that it feels authentic, that it's real. It's hours and hours of the work, even especially if you're working with video content
Mhm.
creators. I know some of them take like at least 10 hours or 20 hours to just edit a 10-second video
Yes.
because of the quality of the work. So that's their time. I 100% agree with this. And something else, a misconception that I wanted to add, I'm sorry, that I totally it just came up, is that just because you're working with influencers, it doesn't mean that just a conversion is just money. Some influencers will be really great for just impressions or engagement. So it really depends on what you're looking for as the goal of your campaign, to who to work with, and being extremely honest. I am extremely transparent with every influencer I work with. I'm like, hey, this is the goal of the campaign. Can we achieve X, Y, and Z? If not, how can we do it? Or if not, we can work on a different campaign together. But doesn't mean that every campaign is really just conversion focused. Obviously, it's like the top tier of ideal goal because we're all in business. We want to make money, we want to grow, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe really sometimes just creating a lot of noise shows the long-term effect, even a different aspect, that it doesn't show the monetary
Yeah.
value now, but it will in a couple of months. And it just takes some time and patience. So I just want to add that because I feel like a lot of people that don't really see the right away conversions, they feel demotivated because they think that's not actually working. But if they really little by little put the pillar in, they'll really
Yeah.
see what the results are long term wise. So it's a strategic long term effect.
Nice. I love that so much. And I think it's a great point because it probably does speak to one of those things that sits in the back of some marketers' minds when they're considering whether or not to implement an influencer campaign. Is this going to be top of funnel? Is it just going to, as I put in quotation marks, just going to be reach or impressions, or whatever it may be? And so, this is why it's useful to have these conversations with folks like yourselves, because we're able to bring that experience in. And Nicole, I know you're running off the back of like 1,000-person conference last week, which had a really strong influencer marketing sort of element to it, to bringing people along. And that wouldn't have been possible, presumably, without those influencers' sort of involvement and advertising and stuff like that. So I guess you're walking, talking evidence that this stuff works if invested in the right way. So that's what could be considered, good marketing. Having a goal, having an idea, what you want to achieve, etc., etc. I love that. I think we need to get into the heart of it, because right now I can see in the Q&A there is a top question that comes from Robert. And folks, I can also see in the chat feature, and this is my fault because I didn't say it in the introduction, but if you have a question, do pop it into the Q&A feature, so I can make sure that all the questions are collated into one space. But the top question in the Q&A feature presently from Robert is, does influencer marketing have a place in B2B marketing? And how do you find influencers in a sector that feels boring or niche? Now, I don't believe that there's such a thing as a boring company, but I do understand that there are more exciting companies out there, and so on and so forth. And Sarah, you made the mistake of laughing, I'm afraid, so you get to go first in this. So does it have a place in B2B, and how do you find influencers in
Yeah,
sectors that feel
it
boring?
definitely has a place in B2B. Everything I do and my team, we are just dedicated to B2B
Hmm.
for B2B. And in fact, when Wix launched their main B2B solution, which is called Wix Studio, which is basically Wix for agencies, Wix for freelancers, for enterprises. So when we launched it, we knew that we have a perception gap among the B2B community, among this new target audience. So we knew that we have a big challenge in terms of our brand awareness when we launched. And we decided to close that gap, or at least to attempt to close that gap through influencers. So in a way to kind of go from the bottom up and to identify in very small niches, let's say web design. That's like considered, I think, a small niche.
Hmm.
So what we did is we did a lot of research before launch to identify the influencers within that niche. Now, influencers is a relative term. Like you have the Mr. Beasts of the world.
Hmm.
That's one thing. But then for each niche, as boring as it may be for an outsider, there will be those people that are leading in that very specific community, that are thought leaders, that are considered experts. They may not even think of themselves as influencers, especially if you deep dive, you go even more like to much smaller niches. But the truth is they have influence. People respect them and their opinions. And what's interesting, especially in B2B, is many of the influencers that we work with are considered nano, micro. They're small. They're
Hmm.
small, but they're so targeted and they have impact on that very specific audience that we want to get to. And many of those people are working with us, like we may be their first brand deal
Yeah.
ever,
Yeah. Yeah.
which makes it interesting. So yes, B2B definitely relevant for influencer marketing, and LinkedIn being, I'd say, the leading platform for that.
Interesting. Well, that you gave us some gold in that last sentence there as well, Sarah, as well as the reassurance with the answer in general. So thank you. Uh, Two questions come off the back of that. The first is this sort of trend of nano influencers, micro influencers, and stuff like that, because that does feel like a quote unquote solution to the quote unquote boring businesses. Um, Element of things. So I want to ask about that, and then I'd also like to follow up that question with finding these people, because that feels tricky, particularly in the nano and micro space. Um, so, Nicole, could we speak to that sort of nano and micro sort of trend? Is that where your headspace as an influence professional is going to more towards, or are you looking to work with the more macro influencers these days, based on your experience?
Yeah, so actually our team's experience in terms of campaigns is not even focused on level of followers. It's more of level of impact within their community.
Okay.
So maybe you have somebody that has 100,000 followers that follow through but have zero engagement. So that doesn't really tell me much. So what we really look at is like the conversion of an engagement, in terms of number of followers and number of like actual communication. Do they have people commenting? Are they replying back to their community? So that's what we see as of what the profile of people that we want to work with. So I think this is why Sarah mentions in terms of like nano influencers. I feel like they have a closer gap to their community and they're
Mhm.
way more present. So we can see that the engagement is definitely higher in that sense. So I think that is where like the definition, my term of like working with nano influencers and also working with someone, as Sarah said, maybe the first brand deal, you're growing with these people together. So it kind of brings like that loyalty of like, hey, I help you, you help me, let's work together. They're even a little bit more invested because they have the brand loyalty on your terms and they understand what's the new update, how can I increase with it. And then now since the brand's already and kind of connected with them their community trusts the brand more and it trusts them more, and it's just kind of like an embedded organic thing, which is beautiful to see it like just flourish together. And it makes our lives easier because we don't really have to do much on our end. They're actually curious because if you believe in your product and they know that they need it, it's just kind of like, great, I didn't know that this actually helps me in my day to day, which is that's what our goal is, to find people that actually need it, that can educate the other people that actually need it. And it's just like this spiral effect. So
I love
that's my take on the nano and
that's
micro.
fabulous. And like as a way of thinking about it, I think that as a quote just from you, Nicole, where you're sort of saying measuring the gap in between the influencer and the community. I think that's such a wonderful way of thinking about it and such a productive takeaway from today's session. If one was to engage in these campaigns, looking for that gap and as small as possible. I love that way of thinking. I think that's really, really smart. So thank you. Um, I want to ask you both about your methods for finding these folks, because I think this is one of the things that
Yeah.
people may or may not struggle with. And I appreciate it'll probably be both art and science. But Sarah, how do you even begin to start finding influencers to work with and getting in touch with
Yeah.
them? And what's that process look like?
Yeah, so when I get asked that by brands, I usually say, if it's the first time you've ever done discovery, if it's the first time you're searching for influencers, then I can assume that you're not sure which platform you should be looking at. And that's at least what I experienced 3 years ago when I did my first research. So at least when I started off on Google. There wasn't ChatGPT 3 years ago. Today there is. So I would say just Google ChatGPT it. Ask that, let's say your niche is MarTech. So ask, look for top influencers to follow in MarTech, top MarTech experts, top thought leaders, whatever, and start to look for names that appear more than once,
Okay.
and start to kind of make a list and see what platforms they're on, which is a good indication of where, which platforms you should be focusing on. If they're all on LinkedIn, well, then that's an easy one. But what if they're on Instagram as well? Then that means that's relevant for you. Another good thing, once you have a list you're happy with, let's say 20, I'd say a minimum of 20. I think it's good to deep dive into their profiles and see who are they following, who's following them, who's commenting on their posts that are relevant. Of course, to stalk on your competitors, who's tagging them, who's commenting on their posts. It's also a very good way to find some good talent. So I think of course, there are tools out
Mhm.
there today, that can help you. There's tools that focus on certain platforms over others. But I always say, I think for the very first time, don't do it organically,
Mhm.
because it just feels different. It kind of feels like you're coming from the bottom rather than just getting the results straight away.
Love that.
Kind of getting dirty in that discovery process, and also be prepared. It could take you an entire day if it's the first time you've ever done it.
I love that. Well,
Yeah.
it's about immersion, right? It's about immersion and understanding, and presumably this will help you as an influencer sort of person to be able to brief appropriately as well. If you're actually sort
Yeah.
of spending time in the industry. Nicole, is your method for finding folks quite similar in terms of just getting down into the weeds as Sarah's described?
Yeah, I was just nodding my head because I'm like, yeah, Sarah, and I get it. Honestly, there are a million tools out there, but
Hmm.
there's nothing, absolutely nothing that compares. And I hate to say it because it's such a tedious task than
Yeah.
to
Hmm.
actually go into it manually. Just because a lot of the tools out there, just pick up on keywords, but they don't know the identification of your brand as well as you do. Meaning, like, how well will it integrate naturally, organically into their content? So, yes, it can tell me that they educate on X, whatever type of topic, which that's a very big help. But I 100% would, even if it's your millionth time to do this, to always like dive deep into their content and say like,
Yes.
what's the best performing content that they create?
Yeah.
Is it video? Is it written platform? What have they done with other competitors? Because even though when I work with influencers, I ask them to give me a specific deck to tell me what's the best performing content, what is their audience insights, what are the best performing channels, etc. Like all their channels numbers, but no one and nothing will ever tell me how great the embedment will look like unless I do the work because I know my brand from head to toe. So I think doing that deep work is what really makes sure that like a campaign really gets well done. So it sucks to say it, but yeah, that
Yeah.
specific detail is what's necessary, especially on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is such a huge thing right now. And unfortunately, their API is closed,
Mhm.
but noticing who is commenting on what, diving into comments is such a huge thing. I'm so happy Sarah mentioned that because people like in the creator sphere, they actually talk to each other and they hang out with each other, they connect with one another. So you can actually see who is talking about what specifically, getting their insights, what are their thought processes, what are they working on, what are they building on different projects coming to see. So in the end, you're kind of like an investigator slash stalker, but being in the space is it's what's helpful and what helps you. Also, we're kind of like talent managers in the end, and helps you snag like, oh, this person is really interesting, I like the way that they think in the future concept of what they're potentially building on. And that's the perfect way to even just have a conversation, connect with them, see how you can potentially work with together. Well, having an open conversation doesn't cost you anything. So I think that's another really great way to kind of just set the seed and see how you can potentially, it doesn't mean you have to work on with something now, but potentially down the line, because you know what the goals for your brand is going to be in the next year or so. So you're actively doing the work, regardless.
Yeah. And
That's
I
great.
just want to add to what Nicole said is that it's tedious, and it's possibly the most important stage.
Mm.
Because if you don't, if you don't invest in that, that's the foundation of your campaign. So if you don't invest, if you don't pick the right influencers, then you most probably won't have a successful campaign. So it isn't to be taken lightly. Like, don't just use a tool, put in a plan, and export a list and reach out because that's awful. Like,
Yeah,
don't do that.
I fully agree. And it struck me as we were walking into today's session, I was thinking about it this morning, that like influencer marketing potentially is more risky potentially than some other channels because
Yeah.
you're exposing yourself to the risk of another human being, who will show up in lots
Yeah.
and lots of different shapes. So presumably this thing isn't just about discovery, it's about brand protection, it's about understanding what people are going to post and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I I kind of want to ask whether this has ever gone wrong in that way, or do the both of you now just protect yourself in such a way by understanding these people straight up the front, and therefore that mitigates this risk that I'm speaking about. Um,
I
um,
I think risk is a huge part of influencer marketing. And I
mhm.
think that if you have a problem with risk, then you probably shouldn't deal with it, deal with
Nice.
influencer marketing. I think I see it as a good thing. Like I
Mhm.
personally love taking risks, and I think the kind of creator economy, working with influencers is a perfect ground for that because no matter how wacky your idea is, you'll most probably find an influencer that is game and is going to want to try. And then the other way around, influencers that have out of the box ideas, want to try something new, they're going to find a brand to fund that.
Mhm.
So I think you need to have that mindset and to just understand that you're going to be very successful in some things, you're going to fail miserably in other things, and it's okay. Like that's the way it goes. And if you don't try new things, you're never going to know what's going to work.
Mhm.
So it's part of a mindset I think you should adopt. It'll be easier for you if you do.
I love that.
But there's a lot of risk, for example, when I don't know if you feel this way, Nicole, but every time we approve a piece of content, it's like a complete risk. Like it could flop and it could go viral. You just you have to understand that you don't have control over every single thing. You need to let go.
100% agree with that. Especially you can work with somebody that has amazing numbers, consistently posting, consistent everything. You work on the brief, you know
Yeah.
that the idea is great, blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing as, I'm sure, like, social media managers understand this. Like, you can be consistent about your strategy, but there's just one video that you don't even plan and just amazingly. And the same with influencers, or it doesn't, or maybe you work with them and they stop answering and you had something posted and you invested a lot of big budget on them and then they just didn't. So now your results are all wacky. So it is a huge risk. I mean, you're working with people, and this is what
Yeah.
my favorite thing about it, but you're dependent on somebody else in order for your results. You can't just control it in-house. So you really need to make sure the communication aspect is really thorough. Make sure that you don't just put all your eggs in one basket. I always at least try to work with a good amount of average number of influencers, never just stick to one or two. If not, then I work with them in brand ambassador, but long-term effect, just so we can actually see consistent change of results over time. But yeah, as Sarah said, it's always going to be a risk completely. 100%. But I think it's a risk that needs to be taken. I mean, I'm a huge advocate for influencer marketing to B2B, and I think we're really just scraping the surface, especially now when everybody, and what I think is going to continuously growing, mostly everybody in-house, they're just going to continue growing their profiles as professionals. So what I see will be like everybody that is a professional will start growing in an influential way. Doesn't mean in whatever scale possible, but everybody has a voice. Everybody can have a voice. So everyone will potentially be influential. So it's better to have educational. There's two things that grow really well: educational content and entertainment content, and
Mhm.
both are can become influential. So it's just going to continue scaling, especially now with AI. It's just going to continue growing and growing and growing. So I think the only thing that's going to set anything apart in terms of content is somebody that has a big community and can actually influence people around it, that have people to back them up. And those are the only people that are going to be able to have some sort of space in the 500 million thousand different tools out there, or different products, etc. So yeah, I'm excited to be in this train, honestly.
Honestly, it's one of those things that, as I said at the beginning of the session, I came into today as a bit of a layperson in the space, and so, um, but the thing that I've noticed, and this is part of my job, is that there is an uptick in conversations around the space. So just to echo your point, Nicole, like it does feel like it's becoming more important, and I think it's the reason why I felt like it was appropriate to put this out to the marketing meetup community, not all of whom will have mega budgets as well, is the points that you were making earlier on about micro influencers, nano influencers, and taking people on a journey. That there's this opportunity to sort of work with people long term, work with people. Perhaps it's their first deal, which is slightly less expensive, or whatever it may be, and sort of access this new channel, which people may or may not have accessed before. So I really appreciate all your answers so far because you've been so clear. That's what I was supposed to say. I was looking at James S in the chat who said, "Hey, I'm cheap." So James S, we'll do a campaign for you. Um, Quite a lot of the questions in the Q&A, and there's 21 open questions, which is a lot by this point, which there's clearly a lot of people who are really interested in finding out more. So thank you for sharing your worlds as you have so far. Is about sort of like the kind of setting a deal with folks. And like, I don't, this wasn't something I primed you for before. So if you tell me to go away and sort of you don't want to give away this magic, then that's fine. But it would be remiss for me to not at least ask you about how those approaches work and how the conversations work and how you begin to set deals with influencers. Particularly because there's a few people in the Q&A who are also asking about like having low budgets or whatever it may be. So Sarah, do you have like a way of approaching folks and sort of reaching those deals, or
Hmm.
and how much are you prepared to share? Because like as I say, I
Yeah.
didn't prime you on this, so
No, it's okay. Um, I usually like to keep things open,
mhm,
meaning like I'll approach the influencer not immediately with a brief. I'll say, obviously introduce myself and what what are we trying to achieve with the specific campaign or activity that we'd like to do with them, or why we'd like to partner with them. Why am I reaching out to them? Um, but I do like to so to not say, hey, I want one reel or I want three reels, how much is that going to cost? So to not be too transactional about it. I
Yeah.
mean, to kind of leave that for a later stage in the conversation, but to start off where I'm, like I said, introducing myself and what I and why I'm reaching out to them and the potential partnership that I see,
Hmm.
asking them if they're at all interested.
Hmm.
And then, if they respond that they're interested in discussing further, then I'll deep dive into if it is a specific brief, I could share it with them at that stage and then ask them, how many pieces of content do you suggest? Because sometimes it's not always clear. One creator would say, one is enough. Others would say, well, let's make a series. Let's do this. Let's do that. Like, so I try to not frame it too harshly and to kind of
Hmm.
leave room for discussion. If it's an influencer that for some reason is very strategic to us, or someone that the campaign idea that I have is a bit more complicated, then my call to action will be, can we get on a call and discuss it and let me share our vision, let me share what we're thinking, what are you thinking? But I try for it to be like a two-way street, for it to be a partnership, a discussion, and not just me buying content from you.
Yeah, I love that. And that speaks to your first answer as well, which is, you know, the second half of your definition earlier on when we were speaking about influencer marketing. You referenced, the influencer is in the front seat of the car of
Yes.
this. And
Yeah.
so the fact that you sort of reiterated this sort of in the negotiation, for want of a better word, um, sort of reinforces that. So I find that really useful because I think it could be easy for folks to sort of turn around and say, look, we want to speak with 20 people to do 20 posts. And the fact that you're leaning on the influencer to get their advice, that feels really healthy. Have you had many occasions where people have turned around and really surprised you in negotiation, where they've been like, actually, this is a way better idea than what you sort of come to me with, Sarah?
For sure. Yeah, it definitely happens where they'll suggest something different, a different content angle, which is what we like,
Hmm.
and in 99% of the cases we'll say, yeah, that's great, let's do it.
Yeah.
So again, I think it depends on the campaign and the goal and all that stuff.
Hmm.
But if there is wiggle room, if there's room to do things out of the box, try something new, I think that's great. And even better if it comes from the influencer.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah.
How about you, Nicole? Is your approach quite similar to Sarah's? Do you have any nuance in how you get in touch and structure deals, etc.? Again, what you're willing to share. I don't want to feel like we're prying too deeply into taking you into territory you're uncomfortable sharing with.
No, no, totally okay with us. Honestly, very similar to what Sarah does.
Hmm.
I'm very for focus on like doing and building long-term relationships. So even sometimes when I do find an influencer that we can't work with budgets because there's no alignment, I always keep in mind and see where we can meet halfway if there's something else that we can support in whatever end, meaning can I support with access to Semrush, or would you like to contribute in our articles, or etc. Some way that we can both benefit from the partnership as a whole. So yeah, we definitely try to make sure that it's a two-way street. It's not I need this or I want this or we need this.
Yeah.
It's never
Yeah.
going to work at
Hmm.
all. And if we're going to work with an influencer long term wise, you want to make sure that it's enjoyable. You're building a really long relationship, and you need to understand it from a brand to not feel like you have the authority of it. Like they're giving you the trust of their community to you as a brand. And that is a lot.
Yeah.
So, mhm.
Love that. And on a far more tactical level, we've got a question here from Rasheen, who asks, is gifting product and hoping they share it a thing of the past? So, I guess that's another thing. It's a very tactical thing, but maybe a way that brands have previously introduced themselves to creators and influencers in the past. I mean, is that a tactic that either of you engage in? I appreciate you both got digital products, and Nicole, you've just referenced that as part of the conversation. So is the gifting game part of influencers still, or is that now dead as a tactic?
I would say it's not dead as a tactic.
Okay.
We still do it just on our end. Some things that I do build on is basically, for example, there's some influencers that I see that are active Semrush users, and they're already using and creating content about Semrush, and we've not used them in their campaign. But maybe they're only touching the surface of some of our tools. So that's my way to say, hey, by the way, did you know that we also have X, Y, and Z? Would you like to test it? So
Mhm.
I'm just upscaling their experience and upscaling the way that they're also educating their audience, just because I'm doing a really good audience listening. So if you don't have budget and this is something that you can potentially do, I 100%, why not test it out?
Mhm.
Also, you need to make sure that you measure the results in the sense of, what will this look like in a month from now? What would this look like in 2 months from now? What would this look like in 3 months from now? How can you scale it? How can you create X number of content? If this is strategic enough for something that is, you have an update coming up with this specific audience, that will work even better because you're just showing casing like the basic level, then the upgraded level, and it just becomes a little bit more seamless, the type of content that they're creating. I think it definitely does work with products. For example, if you have a podcaster that is always using Bose headphones and you just gift it to them, like the upgraded
Yes.
version, they're
Yeah.
going to appreciate it. If they're going to use it, I'm sure they're going to test it if they're already using your products. So why not? It just goes back into like, if I know that if a Semrush user gets an upgraded level for free, I'm sure they're going to test it out at some point. So it's a good test to do, but make sure that you do measure it, because in the end, you're not going to really see the impact. But if you're running with low budgets, why not? Would
Mhm.
be my answer.
I, I love that, and it again, it loops back down to your answers where you were speaking about discovery of folks, and it struck me as you were speaking there that like there's hard work involved in discovering that someone is a SEMrush user, for example. Um, but once you have, then you can start that relationship and start that conversation. Before we went live today, I sort of observed just the way that both of you were speaking about influence marketing in general. You were sort of, it felt like you were in the business of people, and like that's of course we all are as marketers, but like it feels very strongly that the relationships are really really strong for the two of you. So that feels really important. Um, I want to take a slight diversion because we've got 15 minutes left, 23 open questions, and plenty to get through. So um, hopefully we've covered Amy's question, which is the top in the Q&A. So we'll head to Ollie's, which is next. The only point of encouragement I can give to our community is if you see a question that you like, give it a thumbs up so I can prioritize asking our two guests today. So Ollie asks, and I'll send this to you, Sarah, if that's okay. How do you make sure that content that influencers produce complies with brand guidelines? And this feels like a particularly relevant point at the moment.
Yeah.
Without compromising on the content they produce and coming across as an obvious influencer or sort of marketing thing, because presumably that authenticity point, which we established very early on, is really important. How do we make sure that people do brand guideline stuff, but also don't
Yeah.
sort of sacrifice that authenticity?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first opportunity you have to educate them in terms of guidelines, etc., is the brief.
Hmm.
So you want to make sure it's in the brief and that it's clear. If you need to provide them with the logo, I don't know, according to whatever it is that you need. So make sure that they're aware and that they have that. Another step in the journey is the approval process. So they need to, at least we require, and I think most brands do, to see the draft, the video, the post before it goes live in case we have critical feedback. So that's the time for the critical feedback. So if they, and it's happened that they say the brand name wrong or the feature wrong or they show the wrong feature or the wrong product, or these things happen. So there's those kind of obvious situations where you have to give that feedback. There's other feedback that's maybe not so critical, but maybe for in terms of messaging they use the wrong word or stuff like that, that sometimes for brands it's like a big deal, but
Yeah.
for normal people consuming that content, they won't really notice. It is important though, because you want to keep the authenticity. You don't want it to be a brand video.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So in my opinion, and I know that, not all brands share this, and I don't know how Nicole feels about it, but to me, the more off-brand, the better.
Right,
That's how
interesting.
I view influencer marketing. So I don't want it to look like me or sound like me meaning the brand. I
Hmm.
want it to be in the influencer's language and in their style. Because if I didn't like their language as a style, I shouldn't have reached out to them. So I can't reach out to someone and say, well, listen, don't wear that, wear this, change your background, use this music, and our logo should appear throughout the whole video. Like, that's not, because if you want a brand video, then do UGC. Find someone where you love their style, regardless of their following, give them a script, tell them what to wear, and pay them for that, and finished.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, I don't know if Nicole, do you relate to that?
100%. It just feels a little bit, I don't know, forced when it's too brandy. And it's
Yeah.
automatic as a consumer. You're just like, okay, obviously they're trying to sell me something. So they just automatically run
Yeah.
off. So I 1,000% agree with this. The more, and this is what I always tell everybody that I work with, the more it seems like this is just another piece of content that you're creating, the better. But then it also, in terms of impact, what I've seen works better is that this is why I love working with influencers long-term effect, is that if we're going to create this type of content, I would love to work with them long term wise. Why? Because they're mentioning Semrush today. Okay, it caught my ear. They're mentioning Semrush tomorrow. Okay, now I have my attention. Then they mention Semrush in 2 weeks from now. Okay, what the heck is Semrush? Why does he talks about it all the time? And like, I need to
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
And it just really catches the community as in like, okay, the third or fourth post, whatever, they're gonna say, I need Semrush. Obviously, if this person's using it all the time, like, why are we not using Semrush? Like, it just gives that FOMO effect. So long-term relationships obviously show a little bit better of an impact than just a one-off because of the authenticity of the video. So that's a little bit hard one with campaigns when you're testing, at least in the beginning run. So that's why what Sarah mentioned in the beginning, that it's a long-term effect and sometimes things will flop, but you just got to be a little bit patient. It's a long-term effect,
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
like a one-off. It takes sometimes some patience.
I feel like that last sentence there was said quite knowingly there, Nicole. There was a tone to that which was hard won experience. Um, I wanna bring our speakers' LinkedIn profiles up at this point because the question that's at the top of the Q&A here, it comes from Ben, and Ben asks, what minimum budget would you suggest for an entry-level influencer campaign? I.e., if you want to reach 100,000 people with a campaign, what would you expect to pay? The reason why I wanted to bring up the LinkedIn profiles at this point is Sarah, in particular, is fantastic at sharing stuff around like numbers and stuff like that. Historically, I've seen a lot of posts from Sarah who will post numbers about how much you're paying for campaigns and stuff like that, but then also reiterate one of the points which Nicole's made here today, which is about the long-termism of this. So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth here, Sarah, but from some of the posts that I've seen, you've perhaps paid less money up front for maybe a first post or something like that, but then a second or a third or a fourth after the value has been proven with these creators, then there are opportunities for these folks to be earning an awful lot more from these campaigns because you've had that proof. Is that like I think the answer of how much can you expect to pay might be answered with how long is a piece of string to a certain extent. But
Yeah.
with the methodology in terms of pricing and stuff like that, how do you begin to come to that place?
So, okay, so I think if you've never done this before and you have no idea of pricing in your niche,
Hmm.
right? But you've done your research and you have a list of 20, 50 influencers that are relevant. So I would say wait with defining the budget,
Hmm.
reach out to these people that doesn't cost money, and understand what their pricing is, right? But also, in addition to their pricing, ask them for examples of campaigns that they've done with them, with brands. So you can see, they'll send you links to videos that they've done or posts, and you'll be able to see the results of those posts. Like you can see it, it's visible. And I think if you get, say, 20 price quotes, 30 price quotes, like that's enough for you to create some sort of benchmark and to understand also by comparing to the results of the campaigns that they've shared with you, that they've done with other brands, is you can make a rough estimation. Okay, if I, to reach 100,000 views, let's say if that's your goal, first of all, how much content is that? It could be one video,
Yeah.
like, or it could be 5 LinkedIn posts. I mean, but when you have this data, you'll be much smarter to make that decision and understand, well, how much do I need here? $20,000, $30,000, $5,000. I think that's the best way to start.
Nice. I love that. Thank you. And thank you for taking it to that place of particularly when you're
Yeah.
starting, because that's, I imagine a lot of folks watching it today may or may not have engaged in these campaigns before. So to get that benchmark through that, it's.
Yeah, it takes time to create those benchmarks.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it strikes me
Yeah.
as like both an obvious answer, but not an obvious answer at all. So, like, thank you. Like, I think unless you've done it, then I wouldn't approach it that way. I'd just sort of approach someone I like and then say, "How much do you want?" And so so thank you. That's really
I
informative.
I actually have a question here for Sarah. I'm not sure if you guys do this, but when you're working with an influencer, do you usually ask him or her their previous campaigns results or their channels results in terms of like recent engagements and impressions, etc.,
So if it's
to do some sort of projections?
so if it's like LinkedIn, where
Right.
impressions is our most important KPI for us personally
Mm-hmm.
because we do it for brand awareness. So if it's on LinkedIn, then yeah, I could ask them for the past post, recent posts or whatever. But the other platforms that we're on, the data's visible, so I don't actually need to ask. But if I do want to deep dive into data about their followers, then yeah, then
Mm-hmm.
I could, but I usually make the decision of if to work with them or not based on their recent posts, like say over the past 3 months, 2 months, even. I never look back at what they did a year ago, 2 years ago. I really don't care.
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's a good insight just because that's what we do as well. So
yeah,
sometimes when we do projections about a specific campaign, we just look at their profiles and also take a look at their recent views and how consistent they are in posting, just so if we
yeah,
potentially have a projection based on like what we want to do, how would that actually deliver? Then that's a great way to
yeah,
start. So I'm glad we're kind of aligned on that as well.
yeah, totally.
I love
Hmm.
this. So before we went on today's session, then Nicole and Sarah know each other from before today's session, and it was just great listening to you speak. So like, I love that you've got this, and um, I kind of didn't want to ask this question because I think the answer will be it depends on the campaign. But Sarah, you said something interesting there about impressions being your
Yeah.
main sort of KPI, and so as a sort of influencer professional, is that where you think most of your campaigns play most happily in the sort of brand awareness, impressions, reach kind of world?
Yeah.
Um, it might just be yes. It might just be yes, the
Yes.
answer. But
So this is, yeah, we've always viewed, like from day one, and I don't see it changing anytime soon, but we strongly view influencer marketing as a brand awareness activity.
right,
We see it as another piece of the bigger puzzle of brand awareness, where many other teams at Wix are involved and working towards our brand awareness KPIs.
right,
And we are another piece of that puzzle. Now, it means that it's impossible, to take one campaign or one video and say, hey, this did XYZ to our brand awareness. It's
mhm,
just, it's impossible to do that. But we're measuring growth month over month in terms of our activity, in terms of what we do in influencer marketing, and the bigger brand awareness KPIs, like for example, how many people are searching for Wix Studio month over month, and we want to see that growing month over month. If it's not growing, then each piece of that puzzle needs to ask themselves why and needs to improve, and then you check again the next month. So yeah, that's how we view it.
nice. And Nicole, are you the same? Because of course we precede today's chat with the conference and mentioning that you had like 1,000 people at Spotlight last week and stuff like that, and influencers was part of that. So were you KPIing yourself in a similar way to how Sarah's just described? And with the knowledge of this most recent campaign where you presumably wanted to drive people to a conference, which would be a little bit more acquisition-y than sort of brand awareness.
So our major top KPI is traffic, actually.
Okay.
Ideally to focus in conversion. Impressions for sure is a big one as well. But our goal is in generally how many of their community members slash audience can we help them land on Semrush. And then that way, if we understand and contribute their information, we can obviously retarget, et cetera, and just like a long-term effect. So we're a little bit more in the middle, like middle funnel of the campaigns in general. But really, it depends on the campaign because again, like Spotlight was very much like brand impact, foot traffic. We also had a campaign was mostly like traffic in order for them to purchase tickets, etc. So it really, really, really depends. Sarah mentioned a really great one in terms of search traffic of the actual like Semrush or any of our updates of the actual keyword. That's a big one as well. And yeah, so it really depends. But I think long-term wise, we'll probably really focus on conversions, but it obviously really depends on where we are because we have so many different platforms, so many different apps, so many things that we can market that it's just, yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you. Thank you both. The hour's flown by, and so I think maybe we just close with one final question, if that's okay. And predictive stuff is always difficult and stuff like that, but we are getting close to 2025 now and stuff like that. So what are you thinking about for the next year in terms of influencer and making the most of this year? It's probably a lot of the stuff we've spoken about today already, I imagine, but I mean, is there anything that you're thinking about with your planning for next year? And maybe Nicole, if we go to you first.
Yeah, sure. So in a big top level scale, I think that influencers are going to become business owners. So it's great to work with them in a long-term aspect because potentially they'll build their business and they can help you, vice versa. And a lot of brands are going to become influencers. So a lot of anybody internally will also be influential thought leaders, etc. And I'm talking just mostly in the B2B space. And B2B will also, we use a lot of our B2B, B2C tactics in B2B, and I talk about it all the time, just getting creative. We hosted an influencer weekend. We're going to see a lot of more activations, community built-in activities, etc. So anything that is people first will definitely grow. Anything that can stand out and be authentic will definitely grow. A lot of businesses built and based on from influencers based on their communities is going to grow. So just really leaning towards the community aspect is going to be a big one, and thought leadership. At least I mean, just in my space and based on B2B. And I don't know, Sarah, what you think or what you're seeing on your end.
I agree. All of the above. And I think 2025 is going to be just 2024 bigger.
Yeah.
So scale. I'd say, I mean, and I referred to this before, that the beauty of the industry is that really anything is possible. So I think to just continue testing and doubling down on those things that are working more and dropping the things that aren't. And I always, I find it, especially in influencer marketing, I find it pretty much impossible to plan an entire year ahead. So I don't like doing that. We have a more of a kind of flexible, dynamic mindset, and to constantly be trying new things, like I said, doubling down those that are working more, dropping the ones that don't. So it's difficult for me to tell you to answer that precisely.
No,
I think
love it. Go for it, Nicole.
Just to add one immediate thing that I do think would be a good trend to hop on, and I'm not sure if anybody has seen this, but video on LinkedIn is huge. Like the impact right now in terms of impressions is just astronomical. So just testing that as well as like it's kind of like where TikTok was when they were in their brink of like giving the most value to anybody that is really
Yeah.
giving good insights. It's just jump on that. And anybody that is on LinkedIn can really start their voice as of now. So if you're just a small brand or working with people that have a big connection to that brand, do something on video, test it out, see what works, what doesn't. But it's just the perfect place to be on right now because I know TikTok is getting hard to like actually show some sort of
Yeah.
impact. Instagram as well, even though it's getting a little bit better. YouTube is great for long-term videos, but that takes a little bit more budget. But yeah, this is like a great place to start right now if you're just testing with a low budget. Um, yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that, Nicole. I promise I didn't pay Nicole to say that, but last week's webinar was all about making the most on vertical video on the various socials. So, like, if you haven't seen that yet, do check that out because we go into that in a lot more detail, including on how to produce those videos and stuff like that. So, good answer, Nicole. Thank you for talking as well. That's our hour. In fact, it's slightly more than our hour. So thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone in the community as well for your great questions today. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Every time we answered one, there was another one that came up as well. So I really appreciate it. And hopefully we've covered most of the bases from your questions today as well. Nicole, Sarah, hopefully you'll be able to see in the chat feature a lot of gratitude coming your way as well. Just a final prompt that Nicole and Sarah can be found on LinkedIn just there. A big thank you to Exclaimer for being the featured sponsor for today's session and the rest of our sponsors as well, Frontify, Cambridge Martin College, Planable, Redgate, ScoreUp and Storyblock. And a final shout out that next week we sort of transition into a season on planning and marketing strategy for 2025. So in fact, I don't relish doing this often, but I'm next week's speaker, speaking about how to build the bare minimum marketing strategy. So if you would like to be involved next week, then you'd be more than welcome. Thank you all for a fabulous hour. Thank you, Nicole, Sarah, for spending the time. And
It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
really appreciate it. Take care, everyone, and have a fantastic week. Take care.
Bye.